On the streets leading down to the main road to Tiananmen Square, furious people stared in disbelief at the glow in the sky, listening to the sound of shots.
The Tiananmen Square protests caused the loss of rights for the people of China and oppressed their freedoms. This took place in Beijing, China. Freedom of speech is the right to express one's opinions and ideas without the fear of being punished by a person or government and not having your voice hidden from the public. Everyone should be born with this right, but sadly, some people try to take it away. However, despite their efforts, the right to freedom of speech and expression is something that can never be taken away. But our responsibilities as protesters shouldn't take it too far. No one should get hurt, and the government should be responsible for the power they have. They should not be able to censor things for their own gain or faults. This historical event was important because thousands of innocent university students and workers who want to reform were put down. The Chinese government didn't hold up its promises for a fair and equal country. They want to control. After these atrocities, the Chinese government merely pretended it didn't happen and concealed the whole event. Even today, this event is sensitive and severely censored. Throughout the 1980s, China was changing immensely. The Chinese Communist Party began allowing private companies and investments. The leader at the time, Deng Xiaoping, thought of it as a way to boost the economy and living standards. However, the movement brought along with it corruption. The CCP was divided into those who want to change and reform and those who wanted stricter control over the state. By the mid-80s, many student-led protests began. Many of the protesters had lived abroad and experienced new ideas. In the spring of 1989, the protesters grew, with demands for more political and economic reforms, fighting for these foreign ideas of being able to speak freely and believe what they want instead of what their government tells them to think. With the death of leading politician Hu Yaobang, who had overseen economic and political reforms, gathered more protesters on the day of his funeral. In April, calling for greater freedom of speech and press. In the following weeks, protesters gathered in Tiananmen Square with numbers reaching up to 1 million. At first, the CCP took no direct action against the protesters. Many party officials disagreed on what to do. Some wanted to support the protesters, while others wanted to take action. The stricter party officials won, and in the last 2 weeks of May, martial law was declared in Beijing. Between June 3rd and June 4th, the People's Liberation Army began to move toward Tiananmen Square. They began opening fire upon crowds and crushing anyone in their way, arresting protesters to gain control of the area. On June 5th, a mysterious figure faced a line of tanks away from the square. He was carrying 2 shopping bags and was filmed blocking the tanks from moving past. He was then pulled away by 2 men. It's not known today what happened to him. However, he has become the defining image of Tiananmen Square.
The Tiananmen Square massacre involved several key individuals and groups, including the Chinese government, the military, and prominent activists such as Liu Gang and Han Dongfeng. Liu Gang was the leader of the Beijing Students' Autonomous Federation, a group representing students who demanded political and economic reforms. Han Dongfeng played a pivotal role as the leader of the Beijing Workers' Autonomous Federation, advocating for many workers' rights and freedoms. Both figures were central to the protests, which sought greater rights of freedom of speech and action against corruption or inflation.
迅速答复我们的条件，因为广场上同学正在挨饿，如果再不行，还在这个问题上纠缠的话，那么我们认为政府毫无解决问题的诚意。那么我们这些代表
Li Peng came in, gave us a monologue of lecture.
北京已经是秩序大乱，而且波及到全国。
China's leadership was divided, with Premier Li Peng and President Yang Shangkun supporting a hardline approach, while General Secretary Zhao Ziyang advocated for peaceful dialogue with the protesters. However, Deng Xiaoping, the paramount leader, ultimately sided with hardliners and authorized the military crackdown. On June 3rd to June 4th, the People's Liberation Army, under the direction of figures like Qi Hiaotian, who supported using force against protesters, clear Tiananmen Square, leading to a violent and tragic suppression of the movement. The BSAF, frustrated by government corruption, economic instability, and political repression, led the demonstrations in pursuit of greater rights and transparency. The government's brutal response not only ended the protests, but reshaped China's political landscape by forcing strict control over dissent and leaving a lasting impact on history.
In fact, the government has so successfully written them out of history.
No idea?
That random young people we asked didn't even recognize the most famous Tiananmen picture.
Is in which country?
Communist Party is extremely nervous about people learning the fact of what happened, which is people stood up and challenged the government. They are exchanging our economic freedom with our political freedom. I haven't been able to see my parents for the last 30 years. I cannot go back to China, and they denied them traveling abroad.
That's quite a price to pay.
I'm heartbroken for that.
Two different perspectives of the Tiananmen Square protests were the Chinese government and the protesters who were expressing opposition to the government's rules that suppress freedom of speech. The perspective of the protesters was trying to fight for free speech and expression. However, these people fighting for their rights were denied in silence. However, they never gave up. This event, a simple protest, led to the Chinese government trying to shut down the cries for freedom by sending tanks and soldiers to stop the situation. The CCP wanted to suppress this because China wanted control of the spread of information and ideas amongst its citizens. But now, let's get into the short and long-term impacts of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Ma Jian, a protester in Tiananmen Square, has first-hand accounts of the massacre. Although he wasn't present the day of, paramount leader Deng Xiaoping sent 200,000 troops with bayonets, machine guns, and tanks to crush protesters. Ma Jian himself stated if he had been there, he might have been one of the hundreds or thousands of people who lost their lives. This is a short-term impact because even though many protesters died from bayonets, machine guns, and tanks, it didn't affect other events for years or even decades. Fast forward 40 years to June 1989, the culmination of 7 weeks of pro-democracy demonstrations ended with one of the darkest days in China's history. 3 decades later, China's global power rose. Economic gains has transformed the lives of Chinese people, even as the government continues to crack down hard on dissent. This is a quote from Zhou Fangsu, a Tiananmen Square massacre survivor. He is talking about the long-term impacts that have happened since the massacre happened.
The legacy of the protests serves as both a warning and a powerful call for the protection of human rights and the importance of holding governments accountable for their actions, reminding us that rights cannot exist without the responsibilities of those who govern to safeguard them. The aftermath of Tiananmen Square continues to shape China's political state, where rapid economic growth has occurred alongside strict controls on speech and dissent. Despite the government's efforts to suppress the truth and erase the memory of the massacre, the spirit of the protesters lives on, symbolized by figures like Tank Man, embodying the unwavering desire for freedom of speech and the responsibility of the governments to listen and allow peaceful protest. While the protesters exercised their right to free expression and the call for reform, the government's violent response reveals the stark consequences when those in power fail to recognize their responsibility to protect those very rights. The tragic events of June 4th, 1989 not only led to the loss of many innocent lives, but also highlighted the Chinese government's determination to maintain control at all costs, prioritizing its power over the rights of the people.